またすでに夢の中にいるような気がする。夢は無欲の表れというからな。
わしは天下を盗むためには
人間は軽薄なもんですな。生命がどんなに美しいものかってことをもう死に直面したという初めて知る。血の匂いを嗅いで腹の減った野良犬が集まってきやがる。世の中には悪人はいない。悪い環境があるだけだ。
狂った今の世で気が来るなら気は立ちかだ。
We're going to sort of go through how we identify audiences for a program. We're going to talk specifically, as you can see, about Kurosawa. This was a 2-month season that happened in January, February 2023. It was a big program for us. January is always a really big moment for us from a program perspective. We tend to focus on really key directors, filmmakers, the likes of kind of Kurosawa, Kubrick, people like that, Bergman. It's a really big focus. It's a really big sort of moment for us to kind of bring in new audiences. It's really important, introduce new audiences to these big kind of big names. We're going to talk to you about how we identify the broadest audience for a project like this, how we might decide to kind of pitch and position the season. So we might take a particular angle on a director rather than saying we're going to present a full body of work. We might take a particular angle. We're going to talk to you about that. We're going to talk you through a little bit about our kind of creative design process, like how we decide how we represent that pitch and that positioning, and what processes we go through to kind of deliver the key kind of assets that we use as our sort of tools for that campaign. And we're going to share some of those assets with you just as kind of examples of the pieces of work that we produce. And then we're going to sort of round up and tell you how it all did. Because at the end of the day, the most important thing is that we reach out to, you know, as big an audience as possible for the kind of films we're presenting as part of a season like Kurosawa, which is a magnificent privilege to be able to present the work of that director. So we're going to tell you how it did. It's really important. So I'm going to hand over to Seb, who's going to talk you through the pitch and positioning.
So how to sell cinema. So that's obviously kind of like a really big title. And when we first were thinking about how we were going to kind of present this and talk to you guys about how we market our everything, our shows and the seasons that we do, we're trying to focus in on one particular season, because there are obviously, it's a really big challenge that anyone who's working in film at the moment has, is how do you draw people into the cinema? How do you get them away from their TV screens? How do you get them away from their phone screens? How do you get away from their games consoles and into the cinema to and pay and have a kind of shared collective experience? So it's something that has been kind of a struggle for a while after the pandemic, particularly as well. It was a kind of extra element of difficulty really in how we kind of draw people in. There's obviously been kind of huge examples recently of amazing marketing campaigns. The major one over the last summer was Barbie. Obviously, it was a massive campaign. It was a monster hit and kind of unexpected for a lot of people, really. The Warner Brothers who marketed that had, I think, about 100 brand partners that they managed to kind of put together, and it was people from kind of Crocs all the way up to Prada, and they managed to kind of draw all these people together and kind of galvanize their audience in the most amazing way. And we screened it here, and it was going into one of those screenings was really amazing experience, because the crowd was so kind of jazzed up and so ready for it and so excited about it. But the main thing about Warner Brothers working on Barbie is they had a $150 million budget, where obviously kind of they are, you know, making billions of dollars on their box office, but we obviously don't have anywhere near that. And there's a key question of how we can kind of use some of the techniques that with a much reduced budget, and how we can kind of draw people in a kind of similar way and get them excited about film, but without that kind of huge monster budget that a film like that has. So we're focusing on Kurosawa today. Kurosawa has a really long history with the BFI. So this is him outside the old NFT. He opened I think the very first London Film Festival in 1957 with Throne of Blood. And there's been a kind of long association of Japanese cinema at BFI. We've had previous seasons of Kurosawa before. We've had Ozu seasons. We've had Mizoguchi seasons. We had a season on Japanese melodrama, which did fantastically well. And most recently to this Kurosawa season, we had a big season called Japan 2020, which actually got pushed back because the pandemic hit. So it became Japan 2021. But that was a big overview of 100 years of Japanese cinema, and it did very, very well. The Japanese language cinema is the third highest attended after English and French at BFI. So there's a real kind of audience love of this kind of stuff, and we put it on a lot. So a big question for us is, when we're presenting a new season of Kurosawa's work, is how we can actually do something a bit different, how we can kind of approach it in a new way that hasn't been done before, considering we show so much of this kind of film. So whenever we start on a project, we go through a period of background research. It's a really important moment for us, and sometimes we have a very busy program, so there are 3 seasons a month normally, and we have a whole host of other events. We will have different re-releases, new releases that all kind of go through the marketing machine. So it's quite hard sometimes to find the time for it. But when we have a big program like this, we normally try and find some good space to do a bit of background research. One of the key things for this will be actually watching the films, because some of these films you might have seen 20 years ago and you'll think you have them in your head, and when you re-watch them now, they come across completely differently. And that's kind of one of the things we wanted to latch onto. How do these films play today, and what do they mean to people today? So rewatching them is a massively important part. It's one of the brilliant parts of this job, and you know, it's amazing to be able to kind of have screening rooms to do this. But we kind of try and rewatch as many as we can. The next thing we will kind of do is pull people together from across the organisation, because we are obviously in the marketing team. We work very closely with the programming team, but there's loads of other people, from the archive to the press team to the shop to the front of house team, who have really good opinions on this stuff, and it's really important for us not to be too kind of homogenous in our thinking. So we try and pull together people from across the whole organisation. When we kind of normally link it with a screening, and we'll go through have a brainstorm session, and there's some key things that we want to get out of this. So the first key thing is a target audience. So a lot of the time when you're looking to people are talking about marketing stuff, you kind of jump onto the fun stuff. So you want to get straight into kind of what images you'll use, what video you'll use, what trailer, what you'll do for social media. But all of that is all linked into kind of who you're actually targeting for it. And if you don't do that first step, all the rest of it's going to be built on rocky foundations. So that is a key thing for us to get out that research sort of stage. The other key thing is a sort of core positioning for the season. So that is what I was talking about before, about what you want to say about Kurosawa and his films today. So that will be our kind of like main core position that we will try and then seed that throughout the whole campaign. Coming out of one of those sort of sessions, these are the kind of questions that we might ask in those sort of sessions. So we're talking about kind of, for you, what's the most interesting element for Kurosawa film? What do you think audiences who know Kurosawa's name but have never seen his films think of him? And these are some of the notes that came out of it. You know, we're talking about kind of a very human approach, corruption. Someone dared to say that samurai is maybe the most boring part of it, which we obviously didn't agree too much because we stuck one of them on a poster. But you get a lot of kind of different opinions coming through these things, and it's a really good melting pot for everyone to sort of express their views and you to help kind of boil it down to some sort of key messages from that. So coming out of this, looking at one of our main elements to get out of this is the target audience. So we identified 3 target audiences for this season. So one of them is our kind of master audience. So these are cinephiles, BFI members like you guys, people who probably have seen a lot of Kurosawa's films, know him really well as a director, have probably seen will have seen all the kind of big hitter films, but also all of his very early films, the more contemporary ones, and a lot of his kind of later stuff as well. And this kind of audience are much more likely to do a really big deep dive into the program and see a lot of films. The next audience is a kind of like apprentice audience. So this is we often use a term called cine literate, which is sort of people who will know about cinema, will know something about the history of cinema, and like a director like Kurosawa probably would have seen Seven Samurai and Ran and Yojimbo and the bigger titles, but are really keen to kind of find out more and dive a bit more into that program. And then our kind of other audience is our kind of rogue audience. So this is a younger audience, someone who is much more kind of wider and broader in their taste, maybe much more into kind of action cinema, and may have never seen a foreign language film before. So that is one of the kind of key task for us to try to do, is how do you kind of reach people who might just be completely put off because this is a film that's presented in a foreign language. So when we were looking at this, you obviously have a big gamut of people there, and we need to think of one audience that we're focused on really when we're looking at the key campaign. So we chose to focus on the rogue audience of a kind of younger, someone who may not have seen any of these films before. One of the key reasons for that is we do have a lot of, when we're thinking about the artwork, and I'll go on to how we sort of roll out and go out into the wider world with it, but we have a lot of ways to reach our sort of core audience. So we obviously, we'll have the guide, we'll have the website, have lots of ways that we can kind of connect with that. So for this, where we've got a big film season with a really known name director, we really wanted to try and gear it a bit towards an audience who maybe had never seen a Kurosawa film before. So when the other thing that we had looked at for this was the key proposition. So what we came out of that brainstorming process is positioning him as the ultimate action director. So obviously Kurosawa is a lot more than just action. There are some breathtakingly beautiful slow bits of cinema in there, some very kind of delicate filmmaking. So we can never cover everything that he did, because he made so many films and used it's such a complex sort of style. But when we were looking for the campaign, we really wanted to find a way to position him for that younger audience as a kind of the ultimate action director. When we're looking at reaching that kind of audience, we can do a lot of comparisons with other filmmakers who followed on from him and kind of taken influence. So I think it was really key for us to use images like this, where the action through Kurosawa's film is really incredible, and it's obviously kind of inspired a lot of people, a lot of other filmmakers. But even when you're kind of looking at stuff like this, you get such a feel of action for it, and a feel of movement. It's one of the things he's most famous for. So this was something that we really wanted to centre on. The other thing that is really important for us reaching audiences is looking at influence. So, you have a director who died a long time ago. His films are from, a lot of them black and white. They're from a long way in the past. And how do you kind of connect that with the future? So obviously we look through influence, and we look through a lot of kind of other, maybe more well-known directors' names to kind of certain audiences. So he obviously had a huge amount of he obviously influenced a huge amount of people. So in the most recent Sight and Sound poll, so I think Seven Samurai was at number 20 and Rashomon was at number 41 in the greatest films of all time. So people are still kind of positioning him as one of those kind of great directors, and this obviously comes from a lot of that poll was voted on by a lot of directors, a lot of critics. So we're kind of looking at how we can tap into that sort of influence that we have today to reach a more modern audience. Obviously, there are some, he influenced a huge amount of people from, Ingmar Bergman, Steven Spielberg, Satyajit Ray. But I want to just focus on 2 kind of key ones. So obviously you've got Fistful of Dollars on the left-hand side. So Fistful of Dollars is really kind of an unofficial remake of Yojimbo. It's so unofficial that actually Toho, the production company of Yojimbo, successfully sued them for copying their film, and it was quite soon afterwards as well. So it's kind of brazen of them, really. But it is incredibly similar in tone. I'm sure you guys have seen both of them and will know those kind of similarities. But obviously, something like Fistful of Dollars played much more in the West, much more in kind of English-speaking cinemas, and obviously is known to a completely different audience. So building on that kind of influence is really useful for us. And the other one is obviously Star Wars. So George Lucas, huge Kurosawa fan, and seeded a lot of Kurosawa's influence throughout his films. So Jedi, obviously, heavily influenced by samurai, but it kind of goes a lot further than that. He uses specific screen wipes that Kurosawa used. He lifted a lot of elements from the original Star Wars from Hidden Fortress. So you have the film is told through the eyes of sort of comic characters. You've got battle-hardened samurai, same as a kind of Jedi. You've got rebellion led by princess. So he's really kind of lifting things directly from those Kurosawa titles. So again, we can use the love of Star Wars for a much broader audience to introduce them to these kind of films. Following that influence down to kind of something pretty recent. So this is from The Mandalorian, which is a Disney Plus series, which is within the Star Wars kind of universe. And you can kind of see on these sort of side by side. So where this is obviously, they're not kind of stealing, this is homage, but they are, they're taking things directly from Yojimbo, and the whole feel, if anyone's seen that episode, it has a real Kurosawa feel to it. So people will be watching Mandalorian, love that kind of style, and have no idea of where it came from, no idea of the original source material. So that's part of our job as marketing the Kurosawa season, is to kind of make those links together. And going a little bit further, so this is from a computer game called The Ghost of Tsushima, which is a really massive game a few years ago. What you're looking at now, the game is actually in colour, and there's a specific mode on it. You can switch to Kurosawa mode, and it will go black and white. You have a lot more kind of wind going through things, got rain lashing down, and it has those sort of elements of a Kurosawa film. And it is called Kurosawa mode in it, and it's really interesting to think of whether the game is playing that will know who he is, know what that kind of reference is. But this is played by a completely different audience that we would normally reach. So if we can somehow tap into these people, get them interested in seeing where the kind of look of this came from, that can really help us kind of connect with that younger audience that we really wanted to reach. So at the end of this kind of process of kind of research, background research, we will take all the kind of learnings that we have, all of those bits about influence, all of the bits about positioning, and we'll kind of craft it together in a creative brief that we will then hand over to the design team. So we kind of work all in tandem together, but at this stage, it really kind of goes over to them when they sort of will take that brief and then craft it into a key design for it. So for that, I'm just going to pass back over to Darren to take you through how they kind of work through that process.
So I have a team that works within the organisation. We have a team of graphic designers who are responsible for sort of working on all of the work that I mentioned earlier, and they work very closely with Seb's team on delivering the season against the seasons. We have relationships with external designers that we work with as well, and we have relationships with creative agencies that we work with, but we make a decision on whatever the project is and how we're going to handle it, whether we're going to work with somebody externally who has specific expertise, or whether we're going to keep it in-house and it's a project we want an in-house designer to work on for whatever reason. And Kurosawa, we kept that in-house. We realized that the expertise required existed in-house. We had a team that knew the films well, had a lot of experience working within this area, so we decided to keep it in-house. The team was very heavily engaged with Seb's team in that research process. So meetings to talk about positioning and how to pitch, who we were trying to reach. All those things were a really key part of that initial kind of information gathering process that they're going to go through before they actually start the kind of design process proper. We're really looking to respond to a design brief. So designers will always talk to you about how important it is to have a brief to respond to, rather than just somebody just kind of saying, I want a lovely poster or a lovely piece of artwork. We really need to have the detail of a specific design brief to make sure we know that we're kind of hitting the right notes in terms of who we want to appeal to, what elements of a particular director's work we want to kind of enhance or bring out. So it's really important that we work closely with Seb and his team on that to kind of develop that brief. So we're looking, because of the way that Seb's talked about how he wants to position it, and he wants to focus on a younger audience who are into action films, potentially position Kurosawa as the sort of the sort of action filmmaker as a director. All the influences across sort of Star Wars and Leone and people like that. We want to enter into this process with those things in mind. So the first thing we'll do is go through a sort of an image research process. Images are everywhere now. Obviously, Google Kurosawa, you'll find a million wonderful images. They're not always images that we're able to use because of their resolution or their provenance. They might not be. They might be low resolution, low quality screen grabs. They could be anything these days. Everything's available on the web. Also, there are rights issues around images. We work with images that we have rights to use. Those rights can be very broadly available. I'm sure many of you are aware about how clips and image rights can exist on things like YouTube and stuff. There are loose definitions about how the permissions around using images. We want to be squeaky clean in terms of the kind of rights to use images. We are allowed to use images for promotional purposes. So we will select images based on their appropriateness to the brief, what we think they're expressing. The note that Seb made about, are they all images of samurai? Do we want to focus on something different? What story are we trying to tell? And then make decisions based on, again, their kind of their quality, and the rights that are associated with them, whether we are actually allowed to use them or not. As you can see, there's a wide range of images available from Kurosawa's films. Lots of samurai pics, lots of individual kind of characters, but also quite a lot of kind of epic battle scenes, large groups of kind of warriors and horse riding and all those kind of things that we want to kind of use to recreate that sense of a kind of adventure and action and excitement and inject that into the creative. We were aware, as Seb alluded to, that we've presented a lot of Japanese cinema. We've presented Kurosawa a number of times within the BFI, and the focus has quite often been around that sort of lone warrior, lone samurai figure, particularly Toshiro Mifune, who is the most famous of the actors that worked with Kurosawa, and that idea of the sort of lone warrior standing there with a samurai sword, pointing it at the camera, sort of been there, done that on that idea. So we wanted to do something slightly different. The game reference is interesting in this because this kind of, you press your Kurosawa button when you're playing the video game and it goes black and white and suddenly becomes more windy. Weather and environment and the elements are a really, really key part of Kurosawa's filmmaking, and we wanted to make sure we kind of reflected that. So there's no reveal. Sometimes when I give presentations about artwork, there's a big reveal moment, but there's no reveal because you've all seen it already. As you know, we focused on this character in the top right as the kind of sort of almost a sort of lone warrior, sort of samurai figure, but he's presented in a much more kind of epic context. He's not presented as a sort of a lonesome Clint Eastwood style figure, which we might expect. And we'll once we've sort of gone through that process of working out what imagery we're interested in and what we're allowed to use, we'll start to do some research, some background research on visual references. So there'll be some stuff here you'll recognise. We'll take some inspiration from other previous representations of Kurosawa's work, maybe some of the release posters that were made around the time or subsequently, from other films that we think have a similar kind of tone and feel, and we'll sort of use those as kind of inspiration for starting to work up kind of design ideas. As you can imagine, there's a million different ways you can go when you're trying to put a piece of artwork together for something like Kurosawa. So we'll try, often we'll come up with 3 or 4 or 5 different directions of where we might take the creative look and feel. And this is where we ended up, as you know. So hopefully you get a sense of that kind of heroic action figure, that sort of almost sort of lone samurai warrior, but we're not focusing on him entirely. We're also putting it into an epic landscape. We're putting it into an environment that we might recognize from Kurosawa's films. We're putting it into we're injecting a battle sequence into it, so you've got a much bigger kind of canvas for the films. This not just kind of lone warriors sipping sake in a inn. It's really kind of putting it into the kind of elements and presenting it as a vista that will kind of appeal to that broader audience, to people who are interested in the sort of bigger action, the spectacle of Star Wars and Mandalorian and all those kinds of things. And then once we've kind of gone through that process with stakeholders, with Seb and his team, with other members of the BFI, with other people in the BFI, we'll go through that process of discussing and finessing and refining, and we'll eventually kind of come to an agreement where we want to land. We'll then take that artwork and we'll start to roll it out against Seb's marketing campaign. So then there's a big piece of work that has to happen then about, okay, how do we adapt it across all those different kind of canvases and platforms that we want to do to get the film out to the season out to audiences. And Seb's going to take you through what that artwork rollout looks like.
Obviously that whole design process has gone on. We do work together all the way through this, so it kind of, we're doing this sort of separately, but obviously kind of, you know, we sit next to each other all the time. We're working together constantly through that kind of process. But it is something that happens in the design team, and it almost does kind of get given back to us, the kind of key art at the end of it after it's all signed off. And then our next question is what we actually do with this. So when we're talking about kind of artwork rollout, when you're looking at those key designs, they're on a nice, you know, you've got either a square quad poster or a 4-sheet is the portrait version of that. And they're very nice sort of shapes. You've got a lot of space there to work with, but they also have to fit in all different shapes and sizes. So we're thinking for a big campaign like this, we are going to do lots of places where we will need it very, very thin, we need it very, very tall, we need it all kind of different shapes and sizes. So that's kind of when we're looking at the artwork, we have to think about how it will actually kind of get rolled out. Here's some examples of where we might kind of do that. So obviously this is around the building. So we have a huge banner on the side of the building, just on Theatre Avenue. That is obviously kind of has to work at that sort of scale, as well as very long on the canopy in front on the riverfront side of the building. Got a bit of a kind of TV screen there as well. So you can see how it kind of has to be adaptable. You can't always use the imagery with it. So you'll see on that canopy version that it's, you know, we're only using the text, and with someone like Kurosawa, his name has such recognition that you can really kind of do stuff with that. And that was part of our thinking when we're doing the design, that it is, when you see the design on the side of the building, it's quite an all-encompassing full design there. You know, there's not a lot of kind of empty space with not much going on, but we know that we can just use his name and that will still cut through to audiences because there's a real lot of recognition there. The other kind of key element on the other end of the scale is tiny on your phone, which is where we reach a lot of audiences now. So, you know, obviously we used to, in the old days, used to take out a load of print advertisements in newspapers and things, and now so much of the audience is found through social media and through your phone. So these designs have to work tiny as well. You have to fit on little kind of, you know, a small phone screen that you'll be kind of scrolling through quickly. So it's sort of really important that we are able to have designs that are completely adaptable so that we can kind of hit all those different elements of the rollout. And when we are then looking at kind of how we take this out into the wider world, so you have sort of two main areas that you kind of want to reach with your campaign. So one is a kind of BFI audience. So we will we have lots of kind of channels the way that we reach our existing audience. So that might have been huge banners on the side of the building. We have lots of poster space inside here. We have our guide, we have the website, we have our social media channels, email, all of those kind of things, the way we can kind of reach an audience who've been here before. They make up a huge percentage when you're looking at the percentage of people who buy tickets. Existing audiences are a massive percentage of it, so they're incredibly important to us, and making sure we reach that audience and not take them for granted is key to any of the campaigns that we do. So we really try hard to use all the channels that we have to reach our current audience. And for something like this, where it's a really big campaign in our year, so this is a major season in January. The last time we did a carousel season was about 10 years ago. So it doesn't come along all the time. So when we do have big seasons like this, we really want to make sure you can see it across all the different channels. So yeah, that's why having a really strong bit of creative is really good for that, so that you can kind of, if you're looking at the website and the guide and social media, it all kind of matches and just reminds you that the season's on. The other kind of key elements, obviously taking it to new audiences outside of our current ones. So we will do a lot of this through kind of outdoor advertising. For us, we find, outdoor is kind of obviously anything that is billboards, posters, anything you see on the street, really. This is really effective for us. There's obviously a lot of big things going on in London. Big cultural institutions are everywhere, really. So positioning yourself alongside those kind of major cultural events is really key for us with a season like this. So while we're reaching all our kind of channels, we really want people to see it out and about. We want them to see it on their commute to work. We want to see them, when they're out socialising with friends and things like that. So we try and cover different bases here. So we've got, going from left to right, so there's tube adverts, rail adverts, and then bus sides. Tube advertising is really, really expensive. So we save it for seasons like this, but obviously there's an enormous footfall of people on the tube, so it's a great way to reach people, but it is really, really expensive. Rail advertising is a little bit cheaper, so it's kind of good for us to reach out to. When you look at where our audiences come from, because we've got Waterloo on our doorstep, we have a huge audience coming in from the southwest and southeast, so we kind of often will hit. You can pick particular stations that you want to kind of target. You can really refine it down really, really exactly. So when you're working with kind of media agencies, they will pinpoint different stations. You can do different platforms. You can really, really target where you want to kind of reach people. And bus sidings, we don't do it very often, again, because it's quite pricey. But for something like this, it's great because they're a really good form of advertising to reach a lot of people, because it moves around constantly around the capital. Again, you can kind of pick your bus routes and things like that, so it gets quite granular. But it's a great way to see that kind of repeat recognition. Keep seeing the advertising and the branding to remind people that it's on. And this probably won't be their final port of call before they book something. Most of the time when we ask our audiences, where did you hear about it, it's normally the website, because that's the last thing they did before they booked the ticket. But something like this will often be the first thing that they see. The other main thing that we look at for reaching new audiences, as I said earlier, we don't have Warner Brothers $150 million to do a advertising campaign. So we work a lot with partners and a lot of kind of grassroots outreach. So an example of one of the partners we worked with on this was Wagamama. So we're obviously building a lot on kind of any kind of Japanese food, any kind of Japanese cultural links that we can. There's a Wagamama down on the Southbank, which is really useful for us. So we kind of partnered with them, and they created this this kind of menu kind of side advertising that they put on there. They used in the Waterloo one and a few other branches across London. It's a really good symbiotic relationship, really, because they obviously link it with kind of some interesting cultural stuff. There was a discount code that went along with it, so they could offer their clients some special discount. We obviously kind of get this stuff without having to kind of pay for it. So it's a really good relationship that we try and do. It's not always easier. It does get a bit harder. When you're working with really, really big organizations, it's never going to happen without some money changing hands or something like that. So when we're looking at these kind of smaller brands, we can really kind of get effective partnerships going. We also worked with the Japan Center. We worked with kind of a sake company called Kampai. So we sort of did a lot of Japanese kind of cultural, Japanese food links to help us kind of reach an audience who might have a love for that kind of culture, and draw them into seeing something at the cinema. So looking at kind of social assets, just kind of skipping back to that a little bit. So when we are working on anything on social media, people have such a limited attention span on there. It's seconds before people will scroll on to the next things. And when you've ever watched anyone on their phone flicking through Instagram or TikTok, you can see them just keep going through. So if we put the cinema trailer, which we played at the beginning, on Instagram or Facebook or TikTok, it would just get no engagement at all. It's made for cinema. It starts off very slowly. It has really nice kind of slow pace for it. It's made to be seen in the cinema. That's what it's designed for. So when we're working with a trailer company, we will ask them to do social media adapts of it. So this is a kind of a cut down version of the trailer. Obviously, a lot of it is about time. It has to be a bit shorter. The other trailer is about a minute and a half. This is kind of much shorter, but it's also about kind of initial impact. So if you just watch this one through. So you can see it's obviously much shorter, but also it starts very quickly. It has a real big impact at the beginning. If anyone is listening with sound on, it's something to kind of really grab them. So getting people's attention in the first kind of couple of seconds is vital for this sort of stuff, or it just doesn't work at all. We also carried this on. When you saw that main trailer, you would have seen there were some elements where we had some quotes from some other famous directors, again, building on that influence that Kurosawa had. And we created these assets to be really, really small little short snippets of video to play on Instagram stories. So it's 6 seconds long. You get a kind of tiny little snippet. You get a director recommending it. Within that 6 seconds, you're getting in a lot of information. We did 3 of these with different directors' quotes, and these were our most successful things on social media. So it was, stuff like this. It kind of seems so short, and it seems like you really don't get much information. But this is this kind of stuff people are engaging with on social. So it's kind of really important for us to try and use the video assets that we have in this way to kind of connect with that audience. We also had some theatrical releases that ran alongside this. So I'm just going to pass back to Darren to quickly talk about these.
These big projects, very often we will release a couple of films or a film theatrically as well as just the full program here. So this means that we'll take a title or some titles that will then have a kind of UK wide presence, and we'll go out to kind of around the country. So for this season, we released Rashomon and Seven Samurai, and we just wanted to say really quickly that these have campaigns of their own. They relate to the season, obviously part of a kind of a package of cinema we're presenting in the context of Kurosawa, but they have a life of their own. They need to exist kind of on their own in the marketplace. So we actually designed these posters as well, but they have to have their own identity, and they have to kind of be able to stand up on their own in the marketplace. So we were looking to design these to feel kind of tonally the same as what we were doing with the Kurosawa season artwork. But as you can see, they don't look anything like the Kurosawa season artwork. And we'll make that decision to a greater or lesser extent, whether we want to kind of bring these things closer together depending what the project is. So we just wanted to kind of like say to you that these things are happening as well. And sometimes you'll see a piece of artwork out there for a film that feels like it's part of something, but isn't necessarily precisely tied up together with artwork wise. And I think Seb's going to talk about trailer adaptations.
Just when the season was on, right before it, the BFI took back control of the BFI IMAX just around the corner. So this was a kind of huge deal for us. It had been run by Odeon for quite a long time, so we took it back at the sort of just a few months before the season started. This is a great opportunity for us to reach that young audience that we talked about at the beginning. So when the season was about to happen, Avatar 2 was playing. It was obviously kind of like a gigantic hit. It was an audience who might never have seen a Kurosawa film before, might never have seen a foreign language film before. So we wanted to alter the trailer and adapt it for that audience to try and draw them in. So we changed that. We went back to our editing house and got them to re-edit the trailer, which will play in a second. But show how we're kind of tweaking it and aiming it at a completely different audience. If you remember the trailer that played at the beginning. So if you can play the IMAX trailer, please.
血の匂いを嗅いで腹の減った野良犬が集まってきやがる。
わしは天下を盗むためには
You can see that it has a completely different feel to the one that we saw at the beginning of the presentation. And it's a really fine tightrope to walk because we want to be truthful to the kind of films that Kurosawa made. So, you know, when people come to see them, we don't want them to see something they're going to completely not like. But considering this is playing for Avatar, you have to kind of change it and you have to tweak it a bit to bring in that audience. And, you know, hundreds of thousands of people went to see Avatar at the IMAX, and we probably will own, you know, maybe we'll have only drawn in a few thousand from there. But if we could kind of introduce a few people from there to Kurosawa cinema, that'd be a massive kind of success off the back of that campaign. So after all of kind of this stuff, we wanted to look at sort of how we did really and what the sort of end results of the campaign were. So over the 2 months that it was on, 15,000 people came to see a Kurosawa film. 2,494 of those were completely new to the BFI, so had never connected with us at all. 60% of them were non-members, so we were, even out of the new audience, we were really reaching a kind of, a sort of wider non-member audience, as well as our kind of core audience who we thought would love it. And a really, really important stat for us is 23% of those bookers were under 26. We run a scheme called 25 and Under, where people under 26 can get £3 cinema tickets, and it's something we're really kind of trying to build up. And a season like this that comes along where you get 23% of people being in that age bracket is a huge success for us, so we're really, really pleased with that. There's obviously kind of a lot. What we're showing you tonight is a really kind of small selection of what we will do for the kind of campaign. There's a load of other teams who work on a project like this. So obviously the programming team, but you will have the press team, you will have the editorial team, you have sight and sound. So you have a huge amount of people who are helping us reach audiences and reaching out to new people. So we've really only shown you a small kind of thing focusing around the design and kind of reaching some key audiences. But it's, collectively, it's sort of, they all come together. It's one of the great things about an organisation like the BFI. We're able to kind of draw together all that expertise to kind of reach the widest audience as possible. And looking at those kind of stats at the end, I really think it was a really successful campaign that managed to kind of achieve the goals that we set out to do.
There is a programming department who are responsible for deciding what actually goes into the screens. As Seb says, we have 3 seasons a month, and those seasons have different scales. So some seasons are naturally smaller because the number of films that are available within that context are smaller. You might have a filmmaker who's only made a handful of films. They're just naturally smaller. Kurosawa's got a huge body of work, so we make decisions on the level of kind of publicity that we put in place for something like Dorothy Arzner, based on that, really, what we think the kind of size of the audience might be, the number of films that we need to show to give a flavour. So we're quite completist a lot of the time. So when we present something like Kurosawa, unless we want to take a very, very specific niche look at his a specific work or number of works, we'll show everything. We're quite proud of doing full retrospectives. We'll show literally everything that somebody's made quite often, which means with someone like Kurosawa, it's big, and we have to do it over a couple of months to give people the opportunity to see as much as they can, and that means that we have to put more resource into making those tickets available. So do you want to add anything to that?
Just that for something like Dorothy Arzner, for any season, we will always, that initial process of of research and building an artwork around it. We create that for every single season we do. So there is no season that is left just to do its own thing. So something like Kurosawa, which is much larger in scale, we might allocate more budget to do some advertising, do things like that. But something like Dorothy Arzner will still completely go through that process of us thinking who our audience is, how we create a design around it. And we will do a lot more of those grassroots outreach and things that are, are a bit smaller in kind of budgetary scale, but we will sort of always try and give every season the promotion that it deserves.
Yeah, typography is really important, and some designers will really geek out on typography. It is really important. It will be as much about how we want to present someone like Kurosawa as much as anything else. So the trends there tend to be kind of zeitgeists, I think, around kind of typography and the typography that it kind of gets used, and we don't follow those. And I think there's a natural kind of zeitgeist thing that happens that the designers will have typography or color as well. Color goes through trends and phases too. But we'll make a decision on as much as anything on the kind of the positioning. Again, back to that positioning thing about how we want to position Kurosawa. Kurosawa is a gift for Japanese cinema is a gift for a designer because there's so much rich material to draw from. So you can take a font or a typeface that really feels kind of like it has a kind of Japanese inspiration, but you can look out there for endless kind of modern and contemporary kind of twists on that kind of Japanese look and feel. And I think that's what we quite often want to do. We want to take someone like Kurosawa and say, look, he's really contemporary, even though he was making films, kind of 60, 70, 80 years ago. He's really kind of contemporary in terms of the films that he's making. And that's reflected then through the design. So hopefully what we've ended up with is something that looks quite contemporary, doesn't make the filmmaker look old-fashioned.
There's obviously part of the programming team will be a whole kind of events program that goes alongside it. So, like I said, some of them might be kind of on stage Q&As, things like that. We also sometimes just the nature of kind of putting some of these things on when you get full NFT One cinema, you do really have that kind of buzz and that sort of feel across it and that sort of excitement. So some of these films almost do that on their own because they have that sort of feel to them. But if we're trying to add additional things, for some seasons we've done things, work with promotional partners to kind of give out free things when people are kind of entering cinema. We do it a lot in the IMAX, actually, a lot more, because there's a bit more kind of commercial thing behind that. But there's a sort of bit of a thing of trying to eventize those outside of a Q&A and try and make it feel a bit kind of special. But we do a lot of things where people kind of get dressed up to come along. People, if we're showing probably not for Kurosawa stuff, but if we're showing, I remember we did the Indiana Jones trilogy and loads of people came dressed up for that. So some of those things aren't necessarily with someone speaking on stage, but they have that sort of event feel to them. From our point of view, from the marketing team, kind of we can kind of try and push that a little bit, but a lot of that comes from the programming team, to be honest. They kind of help kind of craft that together, and we sort of work on how to communicate that to the audience. But sometimes, a really full NFT One watching Seven Samurai will have that feel without actually having to kind of create anything around it. It's really hard. So when you do digital advertising, you get precise data coming back to exactly how many people have seen, how many have clicked through and bought a ticket. For outdoor, a lot of it is about wider impact across London. So it is almost impossible to measure, really. You can say I will get a report back from advertisers saying it had this much footfall. That's just people walking past. I have no idea if they have gone on to buy a ticket. But I do think it kind of really works, and you do see when you do those big outdoor campaigns, you do get a lot of interest in it, and you do see spikes in sales and spikes in people looking at it more on the website. In terms of kind of how we choose where to go, we work with a lot of media agencies, and all I will do is I will talk them through those target audiences that I talked about earlier. They are really great at going from being, and it can be quite precise. They could be like, this audience live in this neighborhood. This is the bus stops to kind of try and reach that audience. And it's kind of working with those sort of expert partners that we can sort of reach that really. So from my point of view, it really is just about explaining to them really thoroughly what the target audience is. And they've been doing it for years, and they are really good at pinpointing where those exact things will be. A lot of it is location. So we always try and do Waterloo Station. It's really expensive, but it's great if we do have bigger budgets for it, because there's so many people coming through and things like that. But a lot of the times it will be, you get the report back, and it is sort of really random stations around London, but there's sort of little pockets of the audience you want to reach there. So it's kind of in collaboration with the media agencies. It was one of my big worries at the time, because we had these two giant things on. So the Sight and Sound Top 100 poll ran exactly the same time as January. That was a bit longer, around January to March, and this ran January to February. And it was one of my big worries that are there just going to be enough people to come and see this? It was also at a time where cinema was still recovering from the pandemic. So in 2022, it was really, really tough for us. And it was a moment that actually, having those two seasons together, I really think really kickstarted BFI's massive increase in numbers after the pandemic. So while I was worried about it, actually the building was completely alive in those 2-3 months, and it was really amazing. We had a lot of competing messages, and it was a bit difficult for that, but the Sight and Sound poll had a huge amount of press that ran alongside it. The Curaçao had a bit less, really, because there's a bit less news around it. It's us putting on a season we've put on before. It's kind of, there's less kind of actual kind of news element there. The Sight and Sound, once in a decade poll, that got a huge amount of press. So we sort of separated them a little bit that way. So I focused on marketing around Curaçao, and for the Sight and Sound poll, we really let the press do all of the heavy lifting for it, and that we had a phenomenal 3 months in January to March 2023. So there were enough people to come and see them, and I think people being in the building, reconnecting with BFI after maybe not coming for 3 or 4 years, I think they came in, they saw the Curaçao advertising around if they'd come in for the top 100, and I think that kind of really helped as well. So for us, it was a real worry at the start, but actually having those two programs together really, really was the start of the venue kind of coming back in a big way, I think.
It's also an interesting calibration that happens at a programming level as well. So to refer to the gentleman's kind of question earlier about kind of how does the program come together, and those things will be calibrated together. So we'll work with the programming team to identify those different kind of audiences for different programs, to make sure that we don't need to have huge resource for every single thing that's going to happen in the cinemas at a given time. That some things, as Seb says, will benefit from increased press. Some things will be a sort of a naturally kind of attractive thing to a membership audience, and some things will need much more of a push to reach a kind of bigger, broader, kind of younger audience. And those things are all kind of quite carefully kind of calibrated at a programming level too. So that thinking's happening there.
It is really weird because Curaçao is in the top 100. Yeah. So people, some people will have come along and they will know what they're coming to see a Curaçao season or the top 100. So it was a weird thing to run along at the same time. It's quite a hard thing to kind of pin down, because so if we were working in maybe a smaller organisation, we would work with a design agency, which would have a huge fee along with it. There's an internal design agency here, so it's really hard to pin down a budget for things like this, because the BFI is quite a big organisation, and we are paying because we're employing people, but there's not a budget around salaries, and there's not a budget around design or any of the kind of internal departments that we have. So it's quite tricky to say. With the advertising campaign, it's around kind of, you end up spending around sort of like 10 to 15,000 or something like that. We'll kind of get a media thing. Our campaigns are tiny compared to like big studios. You know, we really try and do a lot with not very much at all. So it's quite a difficult thing, and that will be quite a big campaign for us. But you know, it's very small in comparison, and that's why I try and do things like the railway 6-sheet posters rather than a lot of tube stuff, because it's a more economical way to kind of reach audiences. So, but the actual cost of it is very hard to say, because there's so many people who are employed at the BFI who make these things happen, where at a smaller kind of organisation you would have to employ agencies for. So the true cost is really hard to pinpoint. One thing I'd say that we tried to do across this was we always have a big push on big screen experience. So a lot of the stuff Darren's talking about, epic imagery and things like that, we try and sew that into our campaigns a lot, because these are films you can watch. You know, we're talking about quite old films here. You will be able to find them on streaming platforms at the same time as you're paying to come and see them in the cinema. So for us, it's about making it big, making it something you have to see on the big screen, and that you are selling that experience that it's not going to be as good watching it at home.
But we have a real challenge, though. You know, the competing priorities thing happens within this building, but it also happens right across the organisation. We run a streaming platform, so we have you know, we're about the celebration of cinema in all its forms, and it's really important that we present films here in the way they're originally made. But we also are aware there are lots of audiences who want to experience and enjoy cinema at home, or can't get out, can't get babysitters or whatever it is, and we want to make those experiences available too. So it's always a balance for us.
When I was talking earlier about working with grassroots and partners, that was a big part of our focus, was to find Japanese organisations and Japanese audiences. We, apart the targeting for the advertising, they have really good data on kind of where different kind of cultures are living. So there are pockets of areas of London where there's a big Japanese language population. We targeted them. We went through a lot of Japanese language newspapers that we did some specific specialized advertising in. So, and also a lot of organizations that people like the Japan Centre, things like that, who have really good links in with that community. So whenever we put on a season which is from another country or another kind of culture, we always try and engage the people from there to come and see it, and it is a big driver of success for us. It's really hard for us to, in terms of kind of knowing who's come, it's really hard for us to kind of survey, because we have so many screenings. It's really hard to survey across everything. So we don't sort of always have the data exactly on kind of, backgrounds of people who came to see it. But for us, it is a really key driver to try and get a Japanese audience along to see the Kurosawa season. And we did that really by kind of working with organisations in that community. I think it was we probably started with the wider English audience, I think, but we made sure it would appeal to a Japanese audience as well when we were going through the process, working actually, because we worked at the Japan Centre quite a lot, and you would have seen in the trailer Japanese characters kind of come across it, so we obviously want to make sure we're using those in the right way, and they were really great at helping us kind of look at the initial drafts and kind of advise from that kind of cultural point of view, which we might just not know about, and they were really supportive of it. So it is difficult because obviously we need to hit a really broad audience for it. We want it to be a big success, but we do try and keep in mind those audiences from other cultures who might really appeal to this as well.
When we did the Japan 2020 project, we actually commissioned a Japanese design agency, and we worked with a animation studio in Tokyo because we really wanted that to represent kind of Japanese culture in the most authentic way possible. And so we'll make those kind of decisions based on what we want that kind of approach to be, whether we want a kind of a broader approach, or whether we want something to feel that it's very authentic to a kind of very, very specific audience. So we'll make that decision on whether we want to work with a Japanese designer on a project like that, or whether we want to approach it slightly differently. Sometimes it comes down to budget. Sometimes we don't have there was budget available to work with Tokyo Animation Studio, and we don't always necessarily have that. But we're making those decisions all the time.
The programming team tend to work probably about a year in advance. So at the moment, we're looking at programs that run up to this time, 2025. The problem is with something like this is whether when they're confirmed or not, because we try and work as far in advance as possible because it's a long process. But sometimes things move around, just particularly if we're doing a season around a living director who might have a film coming out. Sometimes things get delayed and moved about, so it is a bit of a movable feast. But we try and work about a year in advance. But that's the very beginning of that sort of process. We sort of have kind of monthly cycles of the guide coming out and things like that. So we will sort of start working on a design for a big season like this, maybe 6 months in advance, something like that. Sometimes it's very short notice because things jump around a little bit, but yeah, generally we're looking about a year in advance of the program, probably starting about 6 months on the kind of design work.